This is the MercyTalk podcast. MercyTalk is brought to you by Mercy Multiplied. We exist to encourage, equip, and empower both men and women with the same biblically based principles we've seen work for over 35 years in our residential homes. If you want to find out more, head on over to mercymultiplied.com. Well, hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Mercy Talk. If you're new to this podcast, my name is Rachel Thomas, and I'm the podcast coordinator and content specialist.
And I am Dr. Brooke Keels, and I'm the Senior Director of Counseling and Program Strategy. And for this podcast, we're actually going to have two on a pretty heavy but incredibly important topic of suicide. And so this is not a topic that, we don't shy away from talking about hard things at Mercy. And so I'm incredibly excited for this one specifically. We'll be on September 10th for Suicide Awareness Day. And so I don't think that there's any of us that do not know someone that has either struggled or followed through with suicide or know someone who's a survivor of it, a family member. And so we want to make sure that we dive in and do this really well. And one of the ways that we're going to do that is that we have an incredibly special guest with us here today, which is our 2015 graduate, Ashley. She actually graduated from the Sacramento home, which is, not a bad place to graduate from. We love that home. I love traveling to that home. And so, Ashley, thank you so much for being here with us. And I'm going to actually let you share why you're on with us today. I'm sure people can understand that, but I don't want to take any words from you. So if you would mind just introducing yourself and telling us a little bit about why you're here with us today, I would really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me. First off, I'm so grateful to be here and just being able to share my heart behind why this is so important to me. So as Brooke said, my name is Ashley, and just kind of going into my story, grew up pretty normally at first, actually had a very intense welcoming into the world where I was declared dead upon birth.
Wow.
And it's kind of just a miracle that I'm alive. Even my mother too, she was out for like 2 minutes and it was very chaotic. And as much as a miracle this was, it was eventually turned into darkness. Mm-hmm. And I just look back at my birth, I'm like, maybe I wasn't meant to live. Mm-hmm. And so early roots started in. Grew up pretty normally, grew up in a church that was very much about the law and not love. So when times got hard, I never turned to God because I didn't have a relationship with him. At 7 years old, my parents got divorced. And while they were both great people, I just took it very hard upon myself. But more than that, I wore a mask and I didn't share about my pain. I didn't share about what I was experiencing. And I tucked it all away. Instead, I was like, let me take care of you. Let me take care of you. Let me support you. So going into high school, I moved from my mom's home into my dad's home, and that kind of changed a bunch of dynamics. I was, with a stepmom now, and there were some things that were very difficult in our relationship. So high school years was kind of just a progression of like, these things that are already built up inside that were negative, they were being added to, and they were compacting more. And I coped with that by starting to go into self-harm, starting to develop more major depression, but still I was just like, I am great. How are you doing? Let me take care of you. And never opening my mouth about what was happening inside my heart. So suicide is such a passionate topic for me because the first time I struggled with it was my junior year of high school. And I still remember the night that I laid there heartbroken over a circumstance. And I looked at a bottle of pills and I'm like, maybe it's better to not feel any of this. And so my story, unfortunately, gets really hurt here because the next day I actually took a step and I went to a high school counselor and I was like, hey, I kind of thought about ending my life right now and things aren't good. And they actually did nothing. I walked away and they never followed up and they never said anything. And that was actually really, in a way, traumatic for me because I was like, I'm stupid for these feelings. I'm not supposed to talk to anyone about these, or I'm just overreacting. So that kind of sets some groundwork for continuing to not open up. So after high school, I moved out and I was like, yes, I'm free from all parents. I'm free from all control. Everything's going to be great now. Yeah, my mentality, that didn't change, you know.
We talk about that a lot on here. Yeah,
Yes.
no, everything gets better without structure, right? So
Yeah.
yeah.
So I think that was actually really hard on me, though, because all these lies I built up, I was still believing, all these feelings I struggled with, I was still feeling. And so I was very confused as to why I wasn't better. And so February of 2012 was my first official suicide attempt. I remember I just was carrying so much heartbreak and so much, honestly, terror at living life. Like I didn't want to live life at all. Mm-hmm. And so I wrote a little note in my phone as a goodbye, and I still woke up the next day by the grace of God. Thank you, Jesus. But I just remember being disappointed. I was like, dang. I was like, well, I'm still just going to walk this out. And I walked that day as if nothing had happened the night before. Wow. Yeah. I look back now, I'm like, man, that's crazy. What was I doing? Who was I? But after that, I was like, I guess I'll try to just ignore my pain. So how do you ignore pain in the best way? You find alcohol. And I really did love alcohol because it was the only time I felt like I wasn't feeling the heaviness of everything that was on me. But that eventually led to more pain. It led to me being very inebriated on my 19th birthday, and therefore a friend taking advantage of me, and losing my virginity. And well, I didn't think it was that big of a deal in the moment. I was just like, oh, whatever, I had sex now, I guess that's done. No more waiting for marriage. I look back now and I see how that was a turning point for everything I dealt with. That's when I began to self-harm me more. It's when my eating disorder really developed. It's when I really started to abuse alcohol and medication. It's when I developed anxiety disorder and panic attacks, and I just didn't identify it.
Sure.
So I went through kind of a year of really, at first, going to the hospital for these panic attacks. It's like, something's wrong with me. And they're just like, you're just anxious. I'm like, but something's wrong with me. And so I went through all that and finally kind of got to a place where the first time in my life since high school, I had friends again. And I had a mentor after hitting like a low point. And I was like, I'm not doing well. I'm drinking at school. And she's like, okay, let's talk to a counselor. So I spent the year before going into Mercy at my worst. I started going to counseling. I started trying medication. I started doing the journaling and all the things they told me. And I felt worse. And I was under more attack. And I had multiple suicide attempts that year. And I remember it was just very hard to stay alive, which was confusing because it was the first time things seemed like they should be getting better. And instead, I was just driving recklessly. And I remember just a couple weeks ago, I drove down this hill I used to drive all the time towards my college. And it was this hill that every time I looked at it, I was like, what if I just went straight instead of turning here with the hill? And that was just constantly on my mind every day. I woke up a couple times to a couple notes I'd written while drunk. And I was like, I took a bunch of pills. And I don't know, maybe I'll die. That'd be nice, but I'm sorry if I do. And I'd wake up and find these, and I'm like, I don't remember that. So it's a very, very, very dark time for me. And I finally got to the point where, like, the one thing I was holding on to, like the friendships I had, everything just kind of fell apart. And it was funny because I wasn't going to church at all, but I had a friend who had me go sing with their group at a church. And so I left a little early because I wasn't feeling good and I didn't care for church, but they had a prayer garden. And I went down and I was like, God, if you're real, I've been trying and I'm trying to get better, but I feel so much worse and I can't do this anymore. I was like, I don't want to make it to my next birthday. It was 4 months away. I was like, I don't want to make it there. If you can do something, do it, because I don't plan to make it to my 21st. And I walked away with a sense of peace I've never felt before. I couldn't understand, but I did feel peace. And during the next week, at that point in my life, I was like, everything went to heck. But truly what it was is like God removing everything that I had left holding on to so that I had nothing to hold on to.
Wow.
And I reached my rock bottom and it sucked in the way that I was like, okay, that's it. And I made my plan and I picked my date and started writing notes. I was like, we're done. And I just remember thinking, my mentor was very close to her, and I was like, okay, I can't tell her or she's going to convince me not to do it, but I also can't avoid her because she's going to draw it out of me. So I was like, I'll just act very casual around her.
She was one of those mentors that was like...
She was one of those, and she was so great. Because she'd just call me out, like very straight, very blunt at times. But it's what I needed. And there'd be times like where I needed the dry humor and it was perfect. But other times when I was like, I just need a hug, she's like, I got you. And so I was like, don't avoid her, but don't talk. A very fine line we're walking here. So instead I'm just hanging out in her office doing homework, honestly. And she just looks at me. We're not talking about anything. She just says the words, have you heard of Mercy Ministries? Which is what it was at the time. And I never had. The words meant nothing to me. But in that moment, like everything inside me reared up and gripped at these words and clung to them and was like screaming about them. And I'm just very quietly like, no. When inside there's like this war now raging. And like now I know I'm like, that was Holy Spirit being like, go to this thing.
Yeah.
So what was incredible is in 3 days there was an open house at Mercy, which is super rare. And so I got to visit Mercy within 3 days because it's 20 minutes from me, where I grew up. It's insane. And I got to go and I just kind of spent the summer applying and getting to learn about it. And I was like, you know what? I'm at my end. I have nothing left for myself. I'm going to die. So I will go and do this thing. And honestly, I had such little hope. I was like, I'll go and do this thing to show my family that I tried. And when I finish it, I'll kill myself. So I went into Mercy on September 4th of 2014. And I did not like Mercy one bit when I first got there. Because everyone was just so encouraging and positive, and they wanted to help me and they wanted to be there for me. And I just didn't know how to accept that. I'm like, I wear a mask, I help others. That's my role. So when that's removed, who am I? What am I? I didn't understand. But it was just a year of nurturing love and discovering who the Father is and the plans he has for me, which is kind of more the fact that he has plans for me. I'm like, I don't even know them. The fact that you say you have an intention for me is more than I believed a couple weeks ago. It was an intense process. Mercy can be difficult, but I also had so much negative roots that really had to be plucked up and pulled out and changed. And basically everything I believed about myself, about life, about my relationships with others had to go through a transformation process. I don't really know if there's any part of me that came out the same.
Wow.
So it was just a complete 180 for me. Learning reliance on the Father, learning to talk. That one took me a couple months in general. I remember when the program director one time was like, yeah, you're almost put on probation. I'm like, I was? She's like, yeah. I was like, okay, yeah, I see that. And so I just went through this process of really, I think for me what it was is I fell in love with the Father, and I fell in love with God, and I fell in love with truth, and I fell in love with love. And so I left Mercy like so ecstatic, and I was like, yes, let's do this. I'm stoked. And it was not easy, straight out, because I went through like 2 major losses of like people. And I remember in those times of like, we're praying for their life, we're praying for them to live just from normal human things. And I'm like, yeah, I pray to God, we're good. And then they still passed. I'm like, oh, this is real life. God, you're still good through this. God, you're still good through the heartbreak. And I had to understand and learn that life was still worth living. And I think that's one of the hardest and the best lessons I learned. The last few years have been incredible. I've done an internship at my church. I finally got my BA in ministry leadership. I've done missions work in 13 countries. But my favorites is just sitting down with people and talking to them. And honestly, the best compliments I ever receive are the ones who are like, yeah, because of you, I ended up finding healing. I found freedom. Like, I'm no longer depressed because of the conversations and the seeds he planted in my heart at a very particular time. And to me, that's the best thing, is just being able to share and spread the things that I've learned, and hopefully just be the reason somebody hangs on one more day.
Mercy Multiplied is a free of charge Christian residential counseling program for young women between the ages of 13 through 32. See how one of our graduates left college to get help.
I was nervous because I did not want to leave school. Again, that's the hesitations of what are people going to think? Am I ever going to catch up? People have paid money for me to be here. I've paid money for me to be here. Is this really the plan? Is this what I should do? It definitely was worth it because you have to go through that process of becoming healthier so that when you do graduate from a college, you can pursue what He's called you to pursue. Don't quit, don't give up, don't give in. Then He's gonna lead you and He's gonna guide you and He's gonna bless you.
That story is beautiful, Ashley. Like when you said something a moment ago about I fell in love with, I'm going to mess this up, but basically I fell in love with the Lord, so I fell in love with life. Wow, that really boils it down. Let me ask you this, and Brooke, feel free to hop in here too, but I know in this realm of conversation, it can feel so touchy, like, oh my gosh, if I talk about it, I'm going to push someone to I'm going to bring it up more. They're going to struggle more. I'm going to push them to the brink of actually committing suicide. So we don't talk about it. And so I would just ask you, in your story, like what were some of the things that I guess people said that really helped to make a difference? And then what were some things that they said or didn't say that were like more of a hindrance in your journey?
Yeah. Honestly, the thing that was the most helpful for me, and this is so simple, that my mentor at the time, she told me just take it one day at a time. And I clung to that. Because on the worst days, and the time I felt the most, and the time I felt I couldn't take another step, all I had to do was get through that one day. Instead of trying to think, how am I going to manage this whole life? How am I going to manage the next heartbreak, the next failure? It no longer was that. I was like, okay, just get through the day. They want me to get through to today, and I can do today. And so that was honestly just great. And honestly, what you were saying about people not mentioning it out of fear that they're going to push them closer to suicide, if they're thinking about it, they're already thinking about it. They just feel more alone because nobody mentions it. Just because it's the elephant in the room doesn't make it go away. You mentioned the elephant, maybe we could do something about it.
Wow.
That's really good, because that was one of the things that I was just kind of taking notes of different things you said that I thought were really, just impactful or just for things people to know, but important for people to know. And one of them is that people who are struggling with, like you said, like I just thought about taking a bottle of pills last night. Like that's not good, and they almost always reach out. Almost always, like very rarely does someone not communicate that they're considering ending their life or that they're scared of the thoughts they're having. And so, and that's not about putting pressure on people for them to do everything perfectly, but you went to someone and you said, hey, something weird happened. I need to talk about it. And they didn't follow through. And I think a lot of times people don't follow through because they purely just don't know what to do, instead of calling someone else and saying, hey, which you went to a counselor, so that's a whole other topic that I'll get into another day. But this is normal lay people in your life. If you reach out to someone and they don't know what to say, well, then you, person who someone came to, reach out to someone who does and find out how to support them. And I don't know if you would agree with this, but a lot of times, I work with people, it's not necessarily the trauma itself, it's how everyone handles it around you, right? It's how everyone deals with it around you. And so anyway, I'll let you comment on that. And then I had a couple of other things that I wanted to hear your thoughts on too. So I don't know, what do you think about that?
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with a lot of that. I think the only thing I would say is that if somebody does come to you, saying I tried to kill myself or going through this, your goal isn't to fix them. It's just to be with them, show them that you love them. And I think that was the biggest thing. I still remember a particular night I left my friend's house and I just left and I just got extremely just suicidal and depressed. And so what I did is I just kind of drove back, and I ended up outside, and we're tired. It's like basically midnight at the time I'm leaving. We're college students. We got to go to bed at some point. And I just remember coming back, and all they did was hold me and talk to me for 2 hours, not about what I was going through, just about things, but they just kind of showed, we're here for you, we'll support you. And that was more impactful than saying, life is worth living and you have so much to live for, because I know all those. I just
it's not about changing your mind. Yeah. It's not about changing your mind in that moment. It's just sitting through, and often those feelings do pass, right? Mm-hmm. Like you said, it was an overarching thing that needed to be dealt with at root issues. But in that moment, it was, okay, I'm going to go back to my friend's house and they're just going to be with me and care for me. And not, like you said, no one's going to say that magic word that you're going to be like, oh, well, now I'll never feel bad again. Like, thank you for that, Matt. And that's a lot of pressure that I think people put in themselves. And now probably for you as a helper, there have been those moments that you've sat across from someone and been like, what do I need to say right here? Mm-hmm. And we can just take that step back. And that's what I love, that we train that at Empower too. Like, you don't have to have the answer. You just have to be present and be with them, and just sit in that space with somebody, because that's what they don't have, most of the time with whatever somebody's struggling with, any of their hurts, so that's awesome. I love that. The other thing I think is interesting, just for people to know, that when someone is hurting in that way, like, they will find ways to cope. Right. Mm-hmm. So you mentioned like alcohol, like at the end of the day, all of this was, how do I not feel what I'm feeling? How can I find the things to do to not feel what I'm feeling? And we disqualify people so often by what they choose to use to cope. Whether it's, alcohol, drugs, sex, work, whatever the thing is that people will use, will be like, oh, well, they're just this. Oh, it's just an addiction. Or even after more trauma, right? Out of your attempting to cope, more trauma came out of it. And then it's, well, she's making bad choices. She's doing this or that or whatever, that we just disqualify people in their heart and their root hurts in that place. And just taking a moment to be like, nobody grows up and goes, I'd like to really be an alcoholic in college, right? Like, they're not, do you know what I'm saying? Like, that's not what people want for their lives. People may choose it. They may choose it, but that's not what they want. And those are very different things. So anyway, that was just something that really stood out to me as well. So
yeah, that's good. Well, on those same lines, Brooke, it just kind of makes me think of like, what are some things that people, or some misconceptions that we have about people who are struggling with suicide? Either it's projected by the media, or it's hearsay, or it's just what we assume. I would love to know from you, Ashley, and then maybe Brooke, in your experience too, like, what are some common misconceptions people go, oh, if you're suicidal, then you must, A, B, C. And it's like, well, that's not always the case with everybody.
Yeah, I think some of the things, I think just one of the biggest misconceptions is some people develop this mentality of like, well, their life isn't that bad. Why are they struggling with this? Like, oh, I see their circumstances and that's like nothing. Why are you there? And I think we can't put that on anyone. And I think if you ever think that about someone, if you ever see they're struggling with suicide and you're like, well, I don't get it, so therefore they shouldn't. That's kind of a danger zone, and you probably don't have much to help them with in that moment, because they just need to be understood. But honestly, the way I saw someone relate it, and I love it, it's like telling someone with asthma, but there's all this air, what do you mean you can't breathe?
Wow.
Like, just because
that's good,
you can doesn't mean they can.
Right.
Really, so I think that's a big thing, and I think that was just even very helpful for me, because the biggest thing is that honestly, through all that, I couldn't admit I was depressed and suicidal, because I had a huge stigma about mental health.
Wow.
And that was very hurtful as well, because I couldn't say, oh yeah, I'm depressed. I was just like, I'm stupid. So my self-talk was very negative, and that didn't help anything. So even just being out of that and understanding, it's like, okay, no, there was something like chemically wrong, or something just very wrongly aligned inside that produced that, and understanding that gave me grace to heal from it.
Wow.
That's really good.
Yeah. I think the only other one that I just really like is that people sometimes say, oh, they're crying out for help. Well, in one way, yeah, they're crying out for help. They want to kill themselves. Like, I don't know anybody else who should want to cry out for help. But the way we say it, it kind of almost sounds weak. It almost sounds pitying. But the thing is it takes a lot of strength for someone to say, like, hey, I'm not okay. And I think we need to change our mentality of like, oh, it's a cry for help, which is weakness. It's like, no, it's a cry for help, and they're fighting for their lives, and that's so strong that they feel to the point where life isn't worth living, where it isn't going to be good, but they still say, help me stay another day.
Gotcha. Yeah.
That's really good.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's such a good point. How I'm just trying to think of different families and different people I've worked with, like, that can't quite grasp the idea that someone would be that hopeless. And so, and I think there's something to say, like, you don't actually have to fully understand it, right? Like, even if, and Ashley, I won't pick apart your story, but just even you said, like, what agreement was made before you ever had this thought based on your birth trauma, right? Yeah. Like, of just like, oh, I wasn't supposed to live. And the enemy will take that and run as far as he can with it. And then you didn't meet a God of love. You met a God of law, right? That's who you were introduced to in your church, or whatever the things are that lead up to this. It's not just one moment that somebody's like, I had a bad day. This is it. There's so many things that lead up to that place. And so shifting from this idea that you have to fully understand what they're walking through versus all I know is they are hurting and I've got to figure out a way to support them and help them figure it out. That's it. Like, you can't, if you've never been suicidal, then you cannot really understand that hopeless of a place. And even in that, we talk about this a lot, other residents that have walked through similar things to what Ashley's walked through, those are very different experiences for them too, right? The bottom line is the hopelessness. And then what the enemy fights for is to take the option of a wonderful life off the table, And so it's just the difference between Ashley and someone else, maybe that somebody else never considered suicide, but they considered all these other ways to harm themselves. Or, we act like it's just the worst of the worst, when what you said, it's the most devastating because we lose the person, but it is, just that place of they are hopeless and trying to figure this out and they don't see another way out. And so how do we, help figure that out? Or this idea that it's attention seeking, like that's a whole other, thing. And you just have to take it very seriously. Even if someone is using something like suicide to be attention seeking, there's a lot of stuff there that needs to be, worked through and healed. So anyway, I like that, the things that you shared. That's just really helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, that's so good. That's so good. What would you say, Ashley, if someone today is listening to this and they are thinking about committing suicide or they've wrestled with it before, what would you say to encourage them, to let them know that they're not alone? I'd love to hear that from you. And then maybe, Brooke, a follow-up too, like, what are some next steps that you would encourage them with? Hey, if these are thoughts that you are wrestling with today, here's something that you can go and do.
Yeah, I think there's so much I have, just on this thing, because I'm like, they're all the things I needed to hear. And so they're all the things that stand out to me. So just kind of a couple of big ones. It's like, you don't actually want to kill yourself. You want to kill your pain. And I think just understanding that is very important, because it gives you something to fight against instead of just fighting yourself. But you're fighting to break free from the pain. And so I think with that too, gosh, I love this. But for me, my depression and the suicidal ideation, the suicidal thoughts weighed very heavy on me in a physical manner. And it just felt like I couldn't breathe.
Wow.
And so I just want to say, there's going to be a moment where you feel like you can breathe again, and you deserve to live long enough to feel that.
Wow.
Because I remember the first moment that lifted for me, and I felt so light. And I remember just breaking down in tears thinking, oh, wow, that actually was very heavy on me. And I feel like I could simply take a breath, and I didn't even realize that I couldn't even take a breath without pain, without heaviness. And I think that's just very important. And just another little one, but I think sometimes I know for me, when I was thinking the most about wanting to kill myself, I was looking for a sign. What's the sign? that I shouldn't kill myself, that I should live, that I should go on. And the fact that you want a sign is a sign.
Ashley, you mentioned kind of things got worse when it seemed like they shouldn't. Like you had reached out, you had a mentor, you were doing counseling. And I think that that's something that I would love people to understand. When you do reach out, all of a sudden you kind of are safe enough to feel the feelings that kind of got you there anyway. And it can become so overwhelming. And what I love so much that you did, first off, get a mentor that will shoot you straight and that you have to question, like, I can't hide this from her, but I also can't tell her, that's who you want, right? Find that person.
Yeah.
She sounds great and I would like to meet her anyway, but I just think
fantastic.
But I think knowing that too, there's kind of this idea, and you probably saw it at Mercy, people decide, okay, I'm going to reach out for help. Well, why are things feeling worse? Why is it getting more overwhelming? Well, you're actually digging in, you're actually working through it. You're actually kind of doing the things that you were avoiding for so long. And so, as you know, when you quit drinking, for example, well, then you feel the feelings and they are very overwhelming. And so just giving yourself grace in that too, that the second you reach for help, it doesn't all just shift. And sometimes it can feel even heavier, but now you have built somebody around you or people around you to walk alongside you in that, and even at Mercy, like you said, you didn't come to Mercy. It was like, okay, so glad that I'm here and I'll do everything. And I know how to have healthy relationships and everything will be great. Like, that's not right. You're like, I don't know that I like healthy relationships actually, and so in keeping in mind that, from the physical standpoint of the habits that we form, if you've never really been in multiple healthy relationships, you don't know what the heck that's like, and so even in entering those things, figuring those out, it's just having people alongside you that help keep you hopeful, that help you have the grace, and then go, hey, it's time to go do this next thing maybe, and I just love so much that story. So I don't know, would you agree with that? I just want to.
Oh, I completely agree, 100%.
Okay.
That's
awesome.
Good. Yeah, that's so good. Man, this has been really helpful. And I think even not just hopeful, but like thinking of so many of the assumptions I've made even on my own part, and even desiring to want to get somebody help, and thinking, okay, we talk about this at Empower all the time, I'm not Jesus, I'm not the Savior. So, especially if you're not a licensed counselor, really leaning into those referrals. We talk about that all the time, that referral is not failure. And we're going to be talking a little bit more about that in this next episode. But just kind of want to leave you guys with this, and that is John 10:10. We talk about this verse all the time, and that is that the thief has come, I got to say this the right way, or it's a tongue twister, to steal, to kill, and to destroy. But I have come, Jesus has come, that you might have life and have it to the full. So just know that he is for you, he sees you, and he has a life for you. He does not desire to crush you. And so, Brooke, do you have anything to add to that today as we kind of hop off here?
No, I just think that, Ashley, I can't say what she said better to someone who's walking through it. So rewind it, listen to that over and over and over if you have to. Hear what she said, right? Like, the Lord has such good, wonderful things. And then for those of us that are walking alongside someone in that, or that someone, fear comes in so quickly when you're talking about someone's life. And that is just, it's really important that you pull that in, because that's about you. It's not about them. And so, like you said, your friends that just sat with you, and it doesn't mean there's not a game plan after, right? Sitting with you one night, that was safe one night, but we got to go to the next thing, but the point is being like that fear that comes in that all of a sudden I have to say the right thing, do the right thing. I just really encourage you to renew your mind on that, rip that out, good. And just be present with the person. So, yeah, that's it. That's what I got.
That's so good. Anything else, Ashley, that you would say before we close out here?
You're worth fighting for. You are worth it. You are worth the fight.
That's good. That's good. Thank you guys both. This has been so helpful. And Ashley, we are cheering for you, girl. Like, what an incredible, not just story of redemption, but like, it's just begun, in talking to you even before this podcast, just hearing what what God is doing in your life, and the way that you are loving others around you, He is going to be using this story for years to come. It's going to impact generations, truly. You're not just those around you now, but your family in the future. And so thank you for being obedient in that and being bold and sharing what God has done in your own life.
Seriously,
Thank
you're
you
awesome.
so much for having me.
Yeah. Anytime. You're welcome here. So we're so
just call us up.
Fly on in. Awesome. Well, we're pumped that you joined us for this episode. Heavy, intense topic, but so needed today. Join us next time. We're not done with this conversation as we talk about suicide awareness. We'll see you then.
We're so glad you joined us today. We'd love for you to head on over to iTunes and leave us a review. You can also find previous episodes there. Mercy Multiplied is a nonprofit organization completely funded by our donors. We're incredibly grateful and couldn't do what we do without them. If you want to find out more how you can partner with us financially, head over to MercyMultiplied.com.